Team 1, stand by. Copy. Team 1, standing by. Breach, breach, breach.
Like, hey, look, you know what? I got us back here. Since you don't want to do it, I got us. And so my hand was on my gun. Another incident.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another incident that really kind of sparked something for me, and this one was a more upfront, kind of in your face thing, was when I worked. It wasn't my first child abuse case, but it was the first child abuse case where I wound up rendering CPR. I'd never done CPR on a human being. We all, going through CPR, we all do the plastic dummies where you're clicking the chest and everything like that. That was the only experience I'd had, and I'd always had in my mind, I really hope I never have to do CPR. Like, I really hope the other first responders can get there before I do, which is not always the case because we typically respond much faster than they do. But I didn't want to have to do it. And the call come out one day where there was an 8-month-old child that reportedly had essentially drowned in the bathtub. But it didn't make sense, at least once we stopped to think about the call in particular, because the caller said that the child went under the water briefly, immediately snatched him out, and thinks he swallowed water, and he wasn't breathing. So I get there, and of course, I'm the first one getting there, and I run to this home, and I'm directed to this small 8-month-old child who's lying on this counter, essentially lifeless. And for all intents and purposes, obviously I'm not a doctor, but they had agonal breathing. And my brain kicks into gear. All right, we got to do CPR. This is an 8-month-old, 2 fingers on the chest, make sure we're covering the mouth and nose to do rescue breaths. And it was me and my trainee at the time, and my trainee standing there next to me, and it's an 8-month-old. So it's a tiny little baby, and I'm not tiny. I'm a big guy. So I take up a lot of space, and I'm sitting here trying to do these compressions with my 2 fingers on this child's chest and covering the baby's mouth, making sure I've got the mouth open. I'm going through everything in my head, and this is happening lightning fast. But I'm going through all of this, trying to save this child's life. And a first responder comes in and happened to have a body camera. And I didn't remember doing it until after the court case. And this particular first responder told me that they played his body cam footage during the trial. And in that trial, when they watched that, they said that you could see me, frantically giving compressions and rescue breaths to this child. And I'm sitting there trying to talk to this baby. Come on, buddy. Come on, man. Come on. Come back to me. Come back to me. Keep going. And occasionally I would get that real deep breath, which would give me the hope. And then, of course, no breathing again. So I'm struggling trying to keep this kid alive. And, the child did make it. Unfortunately, it was not a drowning. It was a victim. That child was a victim of child abuse. Fortunately, the individual that did it wound up getting found guilty, 60 years, so on and so forth. But the scar that it left me with on that is I couldn't drive down the road that house was on for about a year. The first time I rode down the road or drove past that house, I broke down in tears in my car, just driving down the road, because I'm sitting here thinking about this 8-month-old child. And this was my first time ever doing CPR. And I was exposed to a lot of things during that investigation that, first caused me to think that I hurt the child.
Right.
But it wasn't possible for what I was doing. It wasn't possible for these injuries to get on the child. And that had to be explained to me because, I felt like I didn't really know what I was doing yet. Here we are, and I'm being shown these injuries. Hey, was this injury here? Was this injury here? Was this injury here? And nobody was intentionally trying to scar me with it. They're working a case with this child. And so when I drove past this house, I just broke down into tears. And a couple of days later, I tried it again, immediately broke down in tears.
Yep.
So for about a year, I did not drive past that house. I would go out of my way, regardless of what the nature of the call was. I would go out of my way to drive around that road. Fortunately, it's not a long stretch of road, but I would intentionally drive out of my way whether I had to go $140 or, normal response times, I'm not going by that house. I need to be able to keep me under control. And of course, because of the stigma and because of everything else, it wasn't dawning on me, hey, dummy, you need to go talk to somebody because this is a problem. You can't even drive down a stretch of road without wanting to cry because you're thinking about this child. And then, fast forward to my first and only experience with attending one of the debriefings. You were talking about, things that you may see. And in this particular case, a young child was the victim of an accidental shooting. A firearm had a negligent discharge. It struck the child, and for all intents and purposes, the child's body was holding on, but barely. And I got there. There was another first responder on scene when I got there, and I immediately started helping him, trying to render aid and do what we could. And I wound up during this time of trying to help, I witnessed him falling subject to the mental breakdown that can happen with experiencing these traumatic events, because this is an individual that I've worked with many a times. I've worked many scenes with, but he was in a full panic. And to the point where I literally had to grab him and say, hey, I'm here. I'm right here. What do I need to do to help? I had to do something to get his attention, to ground him in the moment so that we could do the job. And it's not that he wasn't trying, but his brain was going 1,000 miles a minute and he couldn't process it. So we get things together. We get the child outside. The ambulance gets there. We get the child loaded on the ambulance. The ambulance is gone. Now we're left behind holding the crime scene. And as the time moved on from when it started, one of my other guys that responded there wound up having to go and start writing some calls. So I stayed behind. And you were talking about that reflection moment where you're sitting there coming back to reality, because I was on autopilot. I was working the scene. I was getting a crime scene log, or getting a crime scene established, getting crime scene log, getting consent to search forms, getting photographs, calling crime scene and investigators, and everything that I do so much that's robotic. I was in all those things. And it wasn't until, we had this long waiting period where we had to wait for a search warrant, because they decided to go with a search warrant on this particular case. Obviously that's not something that happens in a couple of minutes. So we're just sitting around, and it was during that time that my brain started to come back into reality. I was coming back out of the autonomous mode and back to reality. And I'm sitting there in my car, and I look at my hands, and I notice I got blood on my hands, and I remembered holding the child's head and things like that, but I've got this blood on my hands. I'm like, all right, I need to decontaminate. Let me start seeing what I can do to decontaminate. So, I immediately take some water out of my bottle. I'm pouring water on my hands, and I'm wiping them, and the blood's not going anywhere. I'm thinking, great. I've let it sit there too long. Now it's dried and it's stuck to my hands. So, I'm using the hand sanitizer that I keep in my door. I'm pumping hand sanitizer. My goofy brain's thinking, oh, well, it's alcohol based, so that'll help clean it. So I'm rubbing, I don't know how many pumps of hand sanitizer. It was way cheaper then. But I'm just dumping this hand sanitizer in my hand, trying to wash my hands, and this blood is just not coming off. So I wind up going to some of the other investigators that are on the scene. Hey, you wouldn't happen to have any soap in there, would you? And nobody had any soap. So I'm like, this is great. Well, I knew I had some more water in the back of the vehicle, back of the patrol car. So I didn't want to use all of my drinking water I had up front. So I go back there, and I'm pouring these bottles of water on my hand, and I'm just rubbing them. And this blood is just not coming off. And then it dawned on me, I turned on a white light, and it dawned on me that there wasn't any blood on my hands. That there was none. My hands were spotless, especially after, 30 minutes of scrubbing them with water and hand sanitizer. My hands were spotless, but in my mind, because of what I just went through, my mind made me believe that that I had this child's blood on my hands. So we get done with the scene, and I don't remember how long afterwards we wound up having the debriefing, but it got announced, hey, we're going to be having a debriefing. Anybody that was involved with this case, we'd like you all to attend, get a chance to come in and sit down and go through this. And there was another opportunity where we had an officer involved shooting that I wish I would have been able to attend that one. But I didn't get the opportunity to. So I'm like, you know what? I want to go. I want to go and see what these debriefings about. I want to get this information. And of course, in my mind, if I need to be the stoic character that's not showing emotion, well, then fine. That's what I'll do, just to kind of get the information. At least I'll know to myself what this whole thing's about. And I decided to go. Well, my coworker that was at the scene with me, who left to go answer calls, opted not to go. And so I go, and that experience was really kind of an eye-opening and emotional experience for me, because I'm sitting there in this room with all of my coworkers, whether they work for our agency or one of the other agencies that we work with. We're all sitting there, and like you were talking about, going through the different steps. That's what we were doing. We're going through these different steps. Everybody talking about, all right, well, what was your role? What would you do? What was you doing? Or what were you doing? And, I'm sitting here hearing how my coworkers, my peers, are experiencing things and seeing things. And it's making me, more comfortable to talk about what I was seeing. And it was during then where I actually shared how I thought I had this child's blood on my hands. And I felt comfortable enough to talk about it, and talking about, we were talking earlier about the support structure we have. My wife was also working during that incident, and she attended the debriefing. She didn't attend it because, she felt she needed to. She said she felt completely fine, but she wanted to support me, because I'd come home and we had that open conversation, especially with me knowing that she understands the job. We had that open conversation when I got home. So when I told her, hey, there's a debriefing and I think I'm going to go, she said, okay, babe, no problem. I'm going to go with you. So she was really there for my support. And when it got to her, she was like, oh no, yeah, I was working in my agency when it happened. I was involved. This is what my involvement was, but I'm not here for me. I really just kind of wanted to support my husband, which was awesome of her, because just like you were talking about, that support structure. And like I've talked about in the past, this job doesn't just affect us. It affects everyone in our lives. And so that's why she was there. And that whole experience was really kind of cathartic for me, because I was able to see what my peers were going through and hear how these things were affecting them. And I was able to share my side of it as well. And after it was said and done, I wound up talking with my coworker who opted not to go. And he told me, he said, Brian, I should have gone. And I was like, yeah. I said, well, you had the option. He said, no, but I wasn't going to go. I felt like I was fine. He said, but I'm gonna be honest with you, man. He said, after I got done answering those calls, I realized that I had that little girl's blood on the trunk of my car. He said, and that's when it dawned on me that I was going to have to go wash this child's blood off of my car. He said, so I went to the car wash, and and that just tore me up. It tore me up seeing this child's blood on my car. And then, here I am spraying off the blood off of my car with this pressure washer, and he said that it's kind of messed up. So he and I wound up not doing the same thing as the traumatic debriefing, but in a sense, that peer-to-peer that I think the traumatic briefing and the critical incident debriefing does, which is brings that peer-to-peer counseling. I was able to do that with him, and I was kind of able to obviously not walk through the same steps that you guys go through with it. But I was able to convey some of those things to him and kind of help him with it as well. So, I can't say enough about it. Go ahead.
I said that's what the important part of it is. Even if it wasn't word for word, as long as somebody was there for him, that's what the program is all about, And that's why one of the important things with this peer debriefing is we try to get people that were involved, some of the peers that were involved in situations that are a lot of similarities to the actual case that we're going to be debriefing on.
Right.
So, like this one, for example, the loss of a child and everything else. I could speak with that one because of losing my child and everything else. But I think that that's where the whole bonding and everything comes from during these things is that, yeah, we weren't involved in the call, but we've been there. We understand. We love you. We're one of you. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So many great things with there. All the triggers,
Mm-hmm.
even the whole time frame thing. Law enforcement has changed a lot nowadays, but I don't care about these guys that have been in it for so long. These things were still happening back in their time too.
Yeah.
Okay. They had to figure out ways and everything else. Yeah, that might not have been called peer counseling or whatever else. But if these programs like this could have been in place for many, many years now, can you imagine how many people could have at least been touched or possibly saved in this career instead of giving up a job that they wanted to do for their whole life because of an event that traumatized them and they felt the desire to leave the profession?
Yeah. Yeah. Talking about how many it could have saved. We talked about in one of the earlier segments or one of the earlier parts of this particular segment about the number of public safety suicides. And I don't remember the number right off the top of my head, but the number of public safety suicides within a given time period. And mind you, they didn't start keeping these statistics until 2016, 2017. It was over 1,200. We'd lost over 1,200 of our brothers and sisters in just a matter of 5 or 6 years to suicide. Now, like I said, then I still haven't gone through and tried to dig up, any of the postmortem investigation or postmortem. What do they call them? It's something along the lines of postmortem mental health evaluations. Where they kind of do a deep dive to try to figure out why this individual wound up committing suicide. I haven't gone through to try to figure all that out because that's not what's as important as the fact that, in a matter of 5 or 6 years, we lost 1,200 of our brothers and sisters to suicide.
Right.
And the comparison I made was when we were talking about the size of the U.S. population. I think it was 339 million or something like that, versus the 4 point something million, that 1.4%. The suicide rate, I believe, was 13.8, and the rate in that time frame from when they started keeping the statistics on this, the suicide rate for those in public safety, the rate alone was higher. And the comparison that I used in that, or the what I helped use to that is, basically a skyscraper, looking over a small village. And in that small village with vastly fewer people, the rate of suicide is higher. And that in and of itself, while the number itself might not be as big as the rest of the 339 million, the rate of loss in that 1.4% is drastically higher than the rest. And that impacts that 1.4% even more. And if we look, even broader, to look at the forest past the trees, when that 1.4% is affected by suicide, by behavioral health conditions such as turning to alcohol or substance abuse, domestic violence, depression, all of these different behavioral health conditions that we develop through poor mental health because of the job or assisted because of the job, the impact that has on the rest of the general population is pervasive, just for the simple fact of we're the ones that are calling. We're the ones that they're expecting to show up and help them often enough in the worst time of their life. And if that rate, even though it started to come back down, if we don't shrink that rate, our population's not getting any smaller. The
Right.
most recent census, even locally, I think we had jumped 20,000 points in the population just in our general location over that 10-year span for the census. So if our rates don't start dropping more, and we know that there's a retention problem or a recruiting problem in public safety, it's hard to get people to want to do this job for various reasons.
Yep.
If we're having such a hard time and our population, that 1.4% population can't grow, but the general population is growing and we're keeping that same rate, whether it's to suicide or some other behavioral health condition, if we're keeping that same rate, we're not keeping up. We're already behind times in keeping up with that population as it is. We're outnumbered. Our call volumes are doubling and tripling, and we've got to break this stigma. We've got to get past it. And critical incident debriefing or traumatic debriefing, to me, is one of those tools. It's one of those tools that, because it's a peer-to-peer thing, you believe that you are talking with people that understand. They understand the job because they do it, whether it's dispatch, fire, EMS, corrections, law enforcement. You're working with people that understand the job. So that makes it more comfortable. And then you're talking about a shared experience, which also makes it more comfortable. And what I think we wind up getting out of that particular thing, or that particular debriefing, regardless of how many you go to, is the ability to go out and, we talked about religion earlier or faith earlier. And when I was going to church on a more regular basis, we would go out and it was witnessing. We would go out and witness to people about our faith. Well, we're doing the same thing. We're doing the same thing amongst our peers when we're going through these things. We're going out and being a witness to our peers. We're sharing our experience with them. So we're trying to bridge that gap with the stigma and trying to show the importance of mental health,
Right.
in particular in its involvement in public safety. And
Yep.
to me, I really think it's important. And, I can't say thank you enough to individuals like you that have made it your responsibility to get the education and get the training and take the time to go ahead and, be a part of, to host and to manage and to do these things. And, I've said it to my family. This is something that over the past few years, I've really kind of had a hard time gripping with, but I'm coming to grips with it, is how much doing this job has taken from me. And it's really kind of hard to say that. And it sounds a little selfish when you say it. But when you work in public safety, it takes so much of you. It takes your individuality. It takes the person you were before you started doing the job, and it changes that person. It takes time away from your family. It takes time away from your hobbies. It takes time away from, we were talking about managing energy or your sleep. It takes time away from your sleep. And you and I both know, both through our training and experience, how important proper rest is to be able to do this job, to be able to cope and manage the mental health aspects that we go through in dealing with this profession.
Right.
So this job takes so much from us. And with you and individuals like you who are going out and doing these critical incident debriefings and these traumatic debriefings, that's even more that the profession is taking from you, because, it does take time away from your family. It does take time away from everything else, but it's you sacrificing that in order to try to give something back to the profession. And again, I can't say thank you enough for taking on that role and taking on that responsibility and making it something that allows you to use your personal experience to be something to build on. You and I have talked about it before, and what started me kind of in my journey with doing the podcast and everything, which was me dealing with the death of my mother. For about 3 months there, I thought I suffered with depression from it. And I wound up, once I got into this job, because I lost her in 2004, I started in 06. Once I started in this profession, I started to use my mother's death as something to help me try to help others.
Right.
And to me, that's an important aspect. Like we were talking before we started recording, and doing the podcast, I want people to understand that you're not alone. You're not the only one out there that is dealing with this. You're not the only one that's experienced it. There are thousands, millions of us that go through these same things. And, hats off and kudos to you, Pete, for using something that's so personal. It's one thing for us to talk about the calls that we ride. It's one thing to talk about the things that we see on these calls or these officer involved shootings. But you and I were friends when you and your wife went through that and your family went through that. And I saw the impact that it had on you. And, I can't say how proud it makes me that you guys are being able to use that now to try to build on. You're trying to use that traumatic incident in your lives to build something better, to turn it into something
What a better
that's good.
Yeah, what a better way to honor the loss of my child and the Lord that put me in this position to do this,
Yes, sir.
They say that your life can be changed by traumatic events, and you can use that for a positive thing, or it can turn negative for you, and the positives that I feel that I got out of it is, we talked about the faith and everything else. Wasn't going to church, wasn't doing all of that and everything else. But I felt that the Lord touched me during this. And ever since then, I've been following that path in addition to this, which is my desire to help people now. So unfortunately, it took a traumatic experience or multiple traumatic experiences in my past to really wake up in my life and realize that this is my calling now. I have a job with a title now, but I feel in my heart that my calling is to help people. And my wife feels in her heart to help people.
Yeah.
That's why I love the program. I love the peer program. I think there's room for growth. I think there's nothing that can stop this from getting into people that are suffering with their marriages. Why can't we get together and discuss what we have been through with our marriages in this profession?
Yeah.
Any other type of things like that. So I think there's definitely growth potential for the program. I look forward to it, even if I'm going to implement it in little things here at our by simply asking, Brian, how are you and your wife doing?
Yeah.
Little things like that. But I'm really looking forward to the growth of this. So
yeah, and I am as well. I think that growth, especially with us trying to reach out, like we are now, through our individual measures, I believe that we can get past the stigma and start getting people to understand one thing that I've said is it's okay to not be okay. It's not a bad thing. It's okay to not be okay. And I think that's something that people really need to come to terms with, come to grips with, and realize how much better their lives can be once they're able to cope and manage and deal with these different stressors that are brought into our lives, based off of not just life in general, because everybody knows life in general can be hard. But when you're working in a profession where, like we talked about, 188 critical incidents over a career, when you're working in a profession like that, it just compounds it. It stacks on and it weighs on you, and it can really make your life miserable. It can make your family's life miserable, and your families, our families suffer enough.
Yep.
Everybody talks about what we give and what we sacrifice when we do the job, and often enough they forget about the toll that it takes on the family. And it was, I think I told you not too terribly long ago, my adult daughter was having a conversation with me, and she asked me a question I wasn't ready for. I never thought I would hear it, and she looks at me and says, Dad, I say looks at me, I don't remember if we were on the phone or not, but she goes, Dad, I've never understood why, you love us so much, but you choose to work in a job that could take you from us. And I wasn't ready to hear that. As long as I've been doing this job, and my child, this child's an adult now, she got a family of her own, and I wasn't ready to hear that. I didn't really, I'm usually pretty quick on an answer, and I had to take a couple of seconds to think on that one. And like I said, it's all too often that we forget about the impact that these things takes on our family. And then when we don't monitor and maintain our mental health, it compounds the impact that it has on our family. This profession has torn families apart. It's done a lot of things, and just like you were speaking earlier, you and your wife went through a hard time. You went through years there where things were difficult for y'all until you were both able to realize that you were trying to make this journey alone when you needed to make it together. And we get lost in those kind of things. So I look forward to it as well. I'm happy with the progress that's been made. I'm happy to see that these upward trends and the statistics are starting to make that curve, or have already made that curve, to start coming back down. And I'd like us to continue that. But the only way it continues is if we all try, if we all come together. Like I said in the previous show, I want this to be a community. I want this to be a place that we can all come together and work to build something better for ourselves, build this profession to be something better, so that we can provide better services for those that we serve. So
Absolutely.
Well, brother, I've kept you quite a while, and I could probably go on for hours talking about things and sharing stories and everything like that.
I could too.
But before we go, one quick question: do other than people just kind of going online and doing their own research, do you have a resource, or do you know where anybody could go to get some information on critical incident debriefing, if they just happen to be listening and want to go and get some information, maybe get it started in their own agencies? Do you have any information that we could share like that?
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest place to go on is to the Office of Professional Standards through State Patrol.
Okay.
The peer support listed underneath there. I just went through there and looked for some of the upcoming peer training classes.
Okay.
They got some coming up that have been full. I was looking at one for possibly sending somebody in October, I believe, in Richmond County. So there's some around here. It's a 40-hour block.
Okay.
That is the best way to get a program like this implemented into your agency.
Okay. And you said that was here locally for our particular was through the State Patrol's website, the Office of Professional Standards, under the peer support?
That is correct. That's where the certification come from. And then you bring it back to your agency, and anybody that's in the peer program in the state of Georgia is available to help you with any incident debriefing that you have.
Okay. Great. Well, Pete, I definitely appreciate the time. I appreciate you witnessing with us and sharing your experience and sharing your knowledge in critical incident and traumatic debriefing. Hopefully we can do something with this, and hopefully it can be beneficial to somebody else. So thank you for your time, and thank you for being willing to come on here and take part in the little community that we got.
Well, I love this program, and I always love our conversations, brother. You're a good man, and I'm glad that you share my same concerns with all of this. So I appreciate you, brother.
Yes, sir. Definitely. I appreciate it. All right, guys. Well, that think that pretty much wraps up this particular show. Obviously, there's vastly more information out there than what we're able to cover in just this little short time period. And like we always say, this is something to kind of wet your taste buds on. Is kind of try to get the conversation started, get you guys thinking. Obviously, if any of you have any questions about this, you can reach out to me, reach out to the show. If you have his information, you can reach out to Pete. If not, hit me up and I can get you his information if you want to reach out to him and get his information. But reach out and let's do this. Let's get this community built and let's start making a difference for those of us that try to go out and make a difference for somebody else. Okay. I hope you guys are able to get something out of it. Thank you for the time. Thank you for your attention, and catch you on the next one. Thank you, guys.